Hi everybody, and a big warm welcome back to the second season of the Mystical Realms podcast with myself, Laura Daligan. I'm so happy that you're here with me. Whenever you're listening to this podcast, thank you for spending your time with me. As I record this podcast, it is late April 2020, and that means we in the UK are in lockdown and in isolation. So it's a very bizarre and fascinating time to be reflecting on all things mystical and magical. So it's close to Beltane on the pagan calendar on the wheel of the year. And Beltane is usually a very external, out there, life-affirming time. And yet we're all inside. I mean, thankfully I live in Glastonbury, so I'm able to get out for exercise without seeing people and having that space. But there's an energy that life around us, that nature is burgeoning, nature is blossoming and bright and vibrant. And that is one of the powerful, magical, amazing lessons of this time. But also there's so much shadow energy, you know. I'm not going to go into the whole COVID discussion in this podcast because it's not a medical podcast, it's a mystical podcast. And also that even though I'm saying that nature is thriving, I'm aware that brothers and sisters in humanity are struggling and suffering. So this is never for 1 minute to lessen anyone's pain. I'm just looking at what's going on as well at this time, and seeing the land so vibrant and bright is healing. It's a wake-up call. It's a time to reflect and see how we are living our lives, and maybe we have been on autopilot for a while. It's something that I've been thinking recently, that with the constant to-do list and the go, go, go mentality, even in Glastonbury, like I'm good at go, go, go mentality, even the most chilled out town in the UK, I think that being constantly busy and constantly on one can make one less kind, not because you're purposefully being mean to anyone, no, but you sometimes avoid making time for people, or you avoid being in the moment and really listening to how someone is, or really tuning in to a situation, and maybe checking in on your neighbours or thinking about how somebody else is actually doing, because we're too busy and we've got this going on and I'll do that later. And this has been a time when, I mean, I have been working all through this, but even though I've been working through all of this, it's still been a slow down and be in this moment. You can't go anywhere. Like, there's no escape. You've got to stay. And it's given me a great appreciation for the things in my home, for my garden, for the small blessings that are all around us. And it's given me a great regard for kindness of others, and for really checking in with people, and for having that time to do that thing, having that time to spend, call up that friend or send that email or just do that small little kind deed. And so actually this wake-up call time, this rebirth time, is hugely important, I think. Again, I wish it had come about just from us waking up or seeing things differently, but we have had to stop, and through that stopping it has caused a heck of a lot of reflection. And so whether you are in lockdown with family, with loved ones, with flatmates, or on your own, each scenario will create some triggers for us, which will bring up some unique issues. And for me, I'm on my own, and that is in some way like being a ninja monk at this time, which sounds like a retreat sometimes or quite lush. And to be fair, it can be an absolute blessing, but it also every situation has its shadow. And my word, has there been reflection and shadow work to be done during this time. So as we're going this time of burgeoning life and beautiful green lush trees and the blossoms coming through, and I've been out for runs and seeing the birds and seeing the buzzards circling, not a plane in the sky, but the buzzards and the birds of prey filling the sky. It's been a really fascinating juxtaposition of life being so vibrant and us all being forced into this reflective and quiet and soul-searching time. And so the goddess that I want to talk about today, well, it's hardly surprising that I'm talking about her when we actually look at it. But my path to this podcast was not a logical one. I didn't think to myself, right, we're kind of in this flower season of life, and yet we're thinking of death and of rebirth and our shadow. Maybe I should do a podcast on the Welsh goddess Blodeuwedd. But it came from different angles, as I am not very logical. I'm just not. As anyone that knows me and has listened to these podcasts will know. This came through my own reflections and came through the goddess as she came to me. As I love geeking out, I love researching, but I don't go through things in a logical or more academic style. So this is how this podcast came to be. In lockdown, in reflection, in a space of just having quite a big birthday, obviously 21 again, but having a big birthday recently, and actually the blessings of that were reaching out to friends in Australia and Norway who I would not have spent my birthday with. So it was, I am seeing the blessings of these things, even though it's not, what was planned. But anyway, so having a big birthday recently, and I was honoured to be gifted with so many lovely presents, and I was sent and given bouquets of flowers, which is so lovely, and my house and my altar has been looking super happy with all these flowers. Aphrodite is like, finally, Laura, you've got me roses. I've been waiting a long time for roses, Laura. And I have some beautiful flowers and home-picked flowers from a friend, and some tulips, and my altar was looking amazing. But obviously a week or so after the birthday, I thought it's time to do something with these flowers, and also had some beautiful cards. So I took the cards and I started to collage with them in my journal. Side note ramble, journal. This is something of a gift throughout isolation. I love journaling in a magical, creative and personal way. My magical journal and my personal journal is one and the same. I don't separate those worlds. How I feel about the world and any magic I wish to do are woven. Any art or any reflections, from a meditation to a dream to a loved one, they are one and the same. So a journal, when I'm doing it, is like my life. But I spend a lot of time not doing the journal because of that whole kindness, busyness thing, self-kindness. I mean, as well, when we talk about this, we don't get that kind to ourselves. That's not very good English, but you know what I mean. We're not as kind to ourselves when we're so busy. So I had things to journal for a long time. There's been things I've been wanting to say for about 6 months, but I can't do it now. Put it off. Then there's the weight, isn't there, behind the things that you haven't done, and then you avoid it even more. Blah de blah. But maybe meltdown last week. Emotional meltdown in lockdown last week. I picked up the journal and I just went there and I just flowed out everything I could. And I am blooming in love with it right now. It is like my companion. I take it to bed with me. I carry it around with me. It's like imbued with the energy of how I am right now. And so part of this was that I took the petals of some of the flowers, I took some of the birthday cards, and I made a little collage because I was wanting to remember these times, And without thinking really, this beautiful owl from a friend's card, cut that out, and then just surrounded it with lots of petals. And I went, beautiful. This is triggering something in my thoughts. I turned to the next card, which was a gift from my lovely friend Danu Forrest, and it was a card painted by her husband, Dan Goodfellow, and it was of Blodeuwedd. And I looked at the painting of Blodeuwedd, and I looked at my collage of owls and petals, and I was like, oh. And I thought about the shadow work and the journey that had brought me to this, and the self-exploration and the vulnerability that I'd had to go through over this isolation time, to kind of understand what was going on with myself. And I was like, oh. And suddenly I became very aware of the presence of Blodeuwedd. I became very aware of her in her half petal, half owl form, reflecting the transformation that maybe we're all going through, but also reflecting the pain and the vulnerability and the wildness of our inner selves. So I did what I like to do. I went on a geeking rabbit hole. I was like reading about her, and from the Mabinogion, from Robert Graves' The White Goddess, and from some more modern pagan books, for example, Goddess Afoot by Michelle Skye, who takes on the idea of Blodeuwedd as a changing goddess, a goddess of shape-shifting, seduction, and the choices that we make. So this was all being very, when you resonate so much, when it doesn't have to be logical, you just go, that is what I'm feeling. And this was summing up a lot of my emotions. And I was like, wow, this is just, I love it how it always surprises me that you kind of go down a tangent and you realize the reflections of what this is bringing up for you and what you're kind of meeting or who you're kind of meeting. So I'm going to read you a part of the poem of Blodeuwedd, Haines Blodeuwedd. This is originally in Old Welsh and translated by Robert Graves in The White Goddess. I will read the whole thing at the end of the podcast, but I want to read you this because this part of it stirs me up. And the story of Blodeuwedd is not glamorous. It's not a happy story. It's pretty toxic. It's pretty much expressions of what goes wrong when you manipulate and you stray from Mother Earth. But this poem is empowering and it's beautiful. 9 powers of 9 flowers, 9 powers in me combined, 9 buds of plant and tree. Long and white are my fingers as the 9th wave of the sea. So that is the end part of the story, the poem, of Blodeuwedd. And that was just stirring. So we're going to go into, for anyone that doesn't know, and a refresher for people that do know, a brief story of Blodeuwedd and Thay. But I would suggest, obviously, reading the Mabinogion and also the White Goddess and other texts to really go there. I'm not an expert on Welsh mythology, though living here in Glastonbury, you kind of, which is fairly close to Wales, and the dwelling place of Gwyn ap Neath and the Tor, and the underworld gateway to Annwn at the Tor, the old gods and the Welsh gods, they do feel part of the threads of life here. And as we're at this time of flowering and Beltane, Blodeuwedd is coming through in her wild essence. So I'm going to go through briefly the story of Blodeuwedd. Then I'm going to go on about some reflections that I've been having about this and the healing journeys that this can bring. So Blodeuwedd is essentially a manufactured being. She is created by the magician Gwydion and Math ap Mathonwe. I do apologise for any bad pronunciations. I do really apologise. So Math wanted to create a wife for his nephew Thay, because Thay had been cursed by his mother Arian Rod for never having a human wife. We'll go into that maybe another time, but for now we just look at the fact that he could not and had no success with human women and was probably getting a little bit frustrated and desperate. And so the wizard, the magician Gwydion, decided to create the perfect woman for Thay, made by man for man. So she is made of wildflowers. She is not human in essence. She is the essence of the wild. She is the flowers that blossom, that roam freely in the fields. She is sexual in nature and passionate. And yet she was created specifically for a task and a role that was not of her own choosing. None of this is of her own choosing. Now, there is murder in this story. And this is not to try and reclaim or restore any decency or goodness to this, but we'll go into the myths and the layers of myths afterwards. But to start this is a being who was created for something, someone, and she had no choice about this whatsoever. So Gwydion created Blodeuwedd from the flowers, and obviously it says here in one book that created by 3 flowers, but in the great poem it's 9 flowers. But obviously 3 multiplies to 9, and 9 and 3s, as we know, is repeated in myths all over Europe. You know, the Celts, the Welsh, the Britons, and the Norse myths are all full of the number 9. We love 9, the 9th wave, the energy of 9 sisters. 3s and 9s, very popular. So we're not going to argue too much about whether it's 3 or whether it's 9. And she was created by these flowers, sacred flowers. And there was also in the poems a man created from fruit. Not in this story, but we're going back to maybe more ancient legends of fertility and fecundity in the land by the creation of a fruit man and a flower lady. And these flowers were created to birth Blodeuwedd, and as soon as she is born, she is immediately married off to Thay. And so that's her life. And she's probably, confused, okay with it. The energy is maybe of a numbness, I think. You know, you're created by man for man. You haven't developed your voice. You don't know yourself. You are going along with life, maybe as in the maiden, mother, crone archetypes that we have, and more archetypes as well. When you're young, you don't know. You don't know yourself. You don't know your voice, and you get swept into things. And this is definitely a story of awakening and many other things as well. So it's a sort of existence, really. And she probably likes Thay. He's probably a nice guy. He's probably fine. But there's nothing that stirs in her wild blood. There's nothing that stirs the flowers of her heart. And so when Thay goes to visit his uncle Math, Blodeuwedd meets a young man named Gron. And he is a hunter. And as soon as they meet, it is lust, it is love, it is passion. Something stirs within Blodeuwedd that is awakening, that is transforming, that is stirring her to her very core, that she acts crazily in following this desire. And again, we're using it as a metaphor, but who hasn't done crazy things for love or desire? And it's immediate, and their love is sudden, it's passionate, and it's ecstatic. And so she cannot be without Gron. She decides she cannot be without him. And she needs to marry. She wants to be free of her husband, Thay, and to marry the person she's in love with. She's probably woken up and realised she was just, not in love with the person she was told to love, that she has a mind of her own. She's a wild woman from a wild flower. And so they decide they're going to murder Thay. As I said, no one comes out traditionally well from these stories, but we'll go into that just afterwards. So her and Gron prepare to commit an unspeakable act. But this reminds me of the Norse story of the death of Balder, because Thay is pretty hard to kill. He has basically been made almost immortal, and there's very rare circumstances that would be suitable for killing him. He's basically almost immortal, except for a few sub-clauses, because of course we all need sub-clauses. We can't have perfection or invulnerability. So she pretends she's worried about him. She pretends that she has bad dreams about him dying, and she gets him to tell her over a season, over a year. Again, this could be to do with seasonal fertility rites as well. She gets him to tell her what it is, this specific situation that means that he would die. And after about a year, she finds out, and she gets him to reenact it just to keep her mind at rest. And of course, when he reenacts this specific situation, when he's between the worlds and water and earth and different things, Gron comes out and murders him, and they murder Thay. And his spirit turns into an eagle, I think, and he flies away, but he's dead. And there's something about I think it's Gwydion that turns him into an eagle, but it's interesting. We're going to look at the bird symbology in just a second. So time passes, and Math and Gwydion wonder where Thay is, and then they get suspicious, and then they come across this either the body, some stories is as the eagle, or as a dead person, but this rotting corpse, nice, the rotten eagle. And he goes down and he goes and tries to punish the lovers, Blodeuwedd and Grom. But Blodeuwedd is clever and wild, and it's very hard to kill her. So, in the end, how Gwydion punishes Blodeuwedd is to turn her into an owl. And he says it's despised by all and will never see the light of sun again. So for a flower to not see the light of sun again, that's pretty harsh. But we'll go into that in a second. She turned into an owl, the symbol of the night, of wisdom, the symbol of the crone. But he says it's despised by all. And so she is now a hunter and a haunter of the night. She will never turn her face to the sun, and she will screech out through the night. And Thay is healed over a period of time from Gwydion and brought back to life. But he can never marry or have children. So there's a tough end for all in this. So as a mythological romance, as a tale, it's kind of it has the drama, the romance, the soap opera style story to it, and it would keep the masses entertained. The bards would tell the tale, they'd sing it, or they would speak the poetry of it, and it would be something that maybe would be seen as one of the stories that would be told to entertain the evenings. However, all myth is not as it seems. We are in the age of Logos. We're in the age of logic. We are in the age where we are very practical minded and we like to know the proof and how things work. Our ancestors lived in the age of mythos. They lived in the age of symbols and the imagination and creating these great gods and archetypes. And so when we tune into the myths, the old stories, we are diving into the world of all of that energy, creativity, the great unknown, the symbols and the magic of our ancestors. And so myths are entertaining. We remember them because we remember all the myths from all over the world. They are ones that they had to be memorable because they were often an oral tradition. They would be spoken rather than written. So they had to have a level of entertainment so everyone would understand them and remember them and repeat them. But that doesn't mean that's all there is. No myth is face value. Everything has depth, has deeper meaning, and holds secrets from primal sources and stories of life and death and rebirth. Now, I'm not going to try and claim that I can tell you exactly what our ancestors meant when they created these stories, but as a flower goddess, as a goddess created from the wildness of the land, who has tried to be tamed and controlled, who has tried to be manipulated and made to be subdued, maybe even in a way that we would see in a modern time, how humans manipulate and destroy the land and disrespect the land. It does not ever work out well. So this story does not work out well. Of course it doesn't. The wildness of Blodeuwedd, she fights back. I'm not saying any of this. There's no positive in their behavior if we see it from a purely human way. But if we see it in a deep archetypal and mythological way, we can see the symbology. We can see how this is a story of how not to do things, how not to kind of manipulate the wild, how to maybe, for masculine and for the feminine, to be balanced and not to manipulate and destroy each other. So there's a really good video that I watched on YouTube about this, and it's from a channel called Celtic Source. And what I will do is I'll post a link in the notes, because it was really inspiring. It's by an expert in the Mabinogion, and he was talking about this tale and the evidence of toxic femininity and toxic masculinity in the story and the results of that. So it's a really fascinating watch. So I'll definitely share the link, because I was really found that interesting. But the idea that if we have Blodeuwedd representing the wild feminine, the essence and the sovereignty and the power of the land, it's a different way of viewing it, isn't it? It's a way of seeing that if you try to manipulate, control and keep it down, it will always rise and always find a way. That the wild feminine desires what it desires and isn't logical or always kind in how it goes for things. And also with the masculine, like poor old Thay, even though none of this is very fair, he was cursed, not to be able to have the love of a mortal woman. And, he had many other curses put on him as well. So he did go through quite a lot that was taken and stripped from him. Again, that creates the situation around him, creates issues in how the masculine is treated. So the whole thing is very fascinating. But I want to look at this in a way that not only is about how we respect the land, how we respect our own wildness as well. We'll look at this goddess as a goddess of love, of facing our whole self, even the bits that we find ugly and struggle to accept. And that is how she came to me this week as well, with the parts of me that I find uncomfortable or try to shy away from, and how to only find wholeness by integrating them, dealing with them, acknowledging them, and letting go of parts of your psyche that are blocking your growth, or that are that old voice that doesn't serve you anymore. Because Blodeuwedd is a goddess of transformation. We obviously have the archetypes of the maiden, the flower goddess, and we have the archetype of the lover, the desirous woman, the passionate woman, and we have the archetype of the crone, with the owl. And all over the world, the owl is a symbol of wisdom. So we're looking at probably an older idea of a cycle of a goddess who turns through the seasons as being a goddess of spring to being a goddess of winter, or a goddess of autumn and wisdom, a goddess of day, of flowers, a goddess of night, owls. So these stories are pointing us towards deep cycles and rhythms in our own nature and in the land. And they can also help us integrate the cycles of ourselves. So Blodeuwedd's myth is about facing the shadow, which is quite a common phrase in modern paganism and psychology and things like that. And I think it becomes a bit throwaway sometimes. Oh yeah, I'm doing shadow work. I mean, I'm just like, are we? I think now we are. I think now we really are, because there's nowhere to run from that shadow. We do live in a stream of distractions, and those distractions have got a little bit quieter, or a little bit quieter. So this is the time of the great shadow work, the time of hearing those shadowy voices. And that's why Blodeuwedd came through to me this week, because she was not having me avoid certain things or be ashamed of certain parts of me. She was saying, You cannot have love or wholeness or healing in the most deepest sense of the word. Like, you can have it, but you can't feel it and experience it in the deepest sense of the word until you acknowledge every part of yourself, what you desire, what you want, what you fear, until you face those bits of you that you find icky, until you come into the shadows, transforming into the deities of the night, the wise owl. The owl, you know, the totem energy of the owl is she who sees what others cannot. See who I can't even say it. Let's try again. One more time for the road. She who sees in the shadows. Say that a few times. She who sees in the shadows. See what you can see in these shadows in these times. You know, this is about deep wisdom. We have Athena in Greece, and she is the goddess of wisdom and insight, and her animal is the owl. So many goddesses. It's a very feminine, powerful, transformative, wise energy with the owl. So do look into owl mythology as well. And I think it's just this perfect time right now to do this, because we are at the time simultaneously of flowering, of life surging in this passionate and raw and powerful way. We're at a time when we can go through the shadow and hopefully be able to rebirth ourselves, to face the things that have been holding us back personally and also holding us back collectively, and make those transformations. There is no way that we as a society, as a culture, can go back to normal. We cannot, in my mind, in any healthy way, go back to the way things were before our lockdown time, because it was unhealthy for us, it was unhealthy for the planet, it was unkind. And what we are given the opportunity to do, as well as deal with pain and things that I wish we didn't have to deal with, the things that I wish weren't happening for people, the things that I really wish we could heal immediately. But in this time, we are dealing with the opportunity to adjust, to go into those shadows and pick out those wounds that make us act stupid, that make us be cruel to ourselves, maybe to others, that make us stay numb and stay asleep in situations which really benefit us to be awake, to access the parts of us that are scared, fearful, loving, vulnerable, desirous, angry, stuck, frustrated, childlike, truly joyful, meditative, quiet, jealous, open, to access all those places and clean them out. See, it's like getting all your stuff out and going, right, what's here? And when you do that, you'll find treasures, you'll find memories, you'll find dreams, and you'll find things that maybe don't need to be there anymore. But once you face them, they're not as big. They're not as worrying, those things within us. And in fact, the things that we maybe find uncomfortable or strange about ourselves, Blodeuwedd helps us look at them and accept them as part of our whole wild being. And they may not be pretty. They may be the stuff of icky nightmares at first. They could be betrayals. They could be something ugly about ourselves that we will not accept. But the more we work on these things, the more we hold them and deal with them and look at them, release them, relieve them, heal them, bless them, the more fun we can have, the more light we become, the more we're able to access what we truly want and our true desires. The more we're able to understand what actually makes us tick, what we deserve, what we came here for. We appreciate the small things in life, the blossoming of a flower, the purr of a cat, the way the birds gather their twigs from the trees to make nests, the way the sun changes shades on the hills. We appreciate these things because that is life. And we've been given the opportunity to stop our hurried busyness, to see life in a totally different way. So Blodeuwedd is bringing us the life and the shadows that we are feeling at this time. And she will help us those who are brave enough to walk into her world, to walk into her realm. She will bless us with the sight to see in the dark, to witness our own shadows. And through doing that, we can finally, wholeheartedly, witness our true beauty, our true essence, and welcome it home. So I hope you enjoyed my stories and reflections on Blodeuwedd. I've been fascinated by owls for quite a long time, and the first song that I wrote as, not a teenager, in my 30s, early 30s, mid 30s, that I wrote was Queen of Owls, and I'm going to play that if you'd like to listen at the end of this podcast. And Queen of Owls is written and sung and played by me and recorded by Chris Down. And it's one of my favourite songs. It's one of my most fairy songs. I don't have much recollection of how the words came out. They were fairy-led. And as Blodeuwedd is of the wildflowers, I feel she had played her part in that song. But before I go and leave you with Queen of Owls, I'm going to read you Haynes Blodeuwedd, translated by Robert Graves in The White Goddess. Haynes Blodeuwedd. Not of father nor of mother was my blood, was my body. I was spellbound by Gwydion, prime enchanter of the Britons, when he formed me from 9 blossoms, 9 buds of various kind, from primrose of the mountains, broom, meadowsweet and cockle, together intertwined. From the bean in its shade bearing, a white spectral army of earth, of earthly kind. From blossoms of the nettle, oak, thorn, and bashful chestnut. 9 powers of 9 flowers, 9 powers in me combined. 9 buds of plant and tree, long and white are my fingers as the 9th wave of the sea.